This is Ahval Online, meeting point of accurate news and free comment on the current affairs of Turkey. Welcome to our podcast series.
Welcome to Turkey Trends, part of Ahval podcast series. I'm Nervana Mahmoud. In the previous episode, I discussed with Professor Johan Bachik how Sunni Islamism is heavily criticized in Turkey at the moment. To join with the same theme, but from a different angle, it's a pleasure to have Professor Ahmet Kuru, Professor of Political Science in San Diego State University and authors of several books. Professor Kuru, it's a pleasure to have you today.
Thanks for having me, Nervana Mahmoud.
You brought the sun with you, so I'm very grateful.
This is San Diego.
Absolutely. Right. You wrote several books, including a very important one on how Islam and on Islam, authoritarianism and underdevelopment. And you argued that the problem of why authoritarianism and underdevelopment is prevailing in many Muslim countries is because of this special alliance between Islamic scholars, the ulema, and state authorities. So I agree with you, and I found your book incredibly fascinating. But if you can explain to my audience why you reached that conclusion, obviously in a very short synopsis, but also I want to explore a little bit more because we have different style of governance or ruling in Muslim countries. We have monarchies, we have autocratic republics, and we have leaders who came through the ballot box, as in Turkey and arguably in Pakistan. Why this alliance you described in your book are prevailing in all those systems and why it is resilient?
Thank you so much. This is a deep question, you suggested a brief answer. That's what I will try. First of all, the reality on the ground is very well known. Out of 50 Muslim majority countries, only 5 are electoral democracies. I was saying 7 until recently. Unfortunately, I would say we lost Tunisian democracy. Then also in Burkina Faso, a military coup destroyed democracy. Now we have 5. I've been studying for 25 years this concept, Muslim democracy or democracy and Muslim world, and holding the electoral democratic numbers itself is a challenge because every year there is a coup or authoritarian turnout. So if we agree on the reality, no need to deny, then the question what explains? There is a polarization between those who blame Islam, from some academics to secularist circles, and those who blame Western colonialism. In the book, I engage with both of these arguments and show the weaknesses. For example, when it comes to Islam, there is the Muslim golden age between 8th to 12th centuries. Muslims produced the largest cities with China, biggest libraries, cutting-edge philosophers and scientists, economic institutions, and they taught Western Europe many things Europeans learn and develop later, like mathematics, how to produce paper, etc. In addition to that, even after 12th centuries, Muslims produce eminent scholars like Ibn Rushd, Ibn Khaldun, and today show a diversity. Therefore, just blaming Islam itself is deeply misleading, I explain in the book. But Western colonialism also, chronologically, when the Western countries colonized the Muslim world, particularly the Middle East, stagnation was already there. Intellectual, scientific, economic stagnation. And also today, many post-colonial countries in Asia, Latin America, achieve some level of development and democracy. Why not in the Middle East and other parts of the Muslim world? Instead, as you rightly point out, I try to understand the concept of ulema-state alliance. Interestingly, I find out that this did not exist before the 11th century. Of course, the time of Prophet ﷺ and the 4 caliphs, etc., meant a religious politics combination, but after them, Umayyad and Abbasi experience a substantial distance between Sunni and Shia ulema and political authorities until the 11th century. After the 11th century, with economic centralization, political militarization, certain level of rise of feudalism, the Selçuks, then the Ottomans, and the Safavids produced Shia version of ulema state alliance. It came all the way today with, of course, many transformations. Therefore, I wrote 300 pages book to analyze almost every century period in different geographies. So let me conclude saying that, of course, there is a complexity and variation. The ulema state alliance in Taliban in Afghanistan, and that in Egypt, and that in Saudi Arabia, and Iran and Turkey are all different. But at the core, we see how Sunni or Shia ulema use the state authority to impose an orthodoxy, to claim a monopoly on education, especially religious education, whereas politicians are used to use religion to justify and gain legitimacy. And this is a problem that we need to deal with, rather than denying, etc., with certain differences in all the countries you refer to. We see the symptoms of this problem.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more. I am from my native Egypt, and even now, while there are crises in economy in the world, etc., the religious authority is engaged in topics which I found it very alarming and not very important. But here we go. Going back, let's just link that to Turkey. Turkey had an era of rigid authoritarianism, describing or borrowing a line from your book, during Ataturk and Kemalism. But then when Erdogan came to power, he resorted initially to passive authoritarianism, passive secularism, to try to integrate the balance between religion and the state. But then later, he resorted to the same alliance between the ulema and state authority to feed his power a bit more. I'm interested in the Turkish example on why we end up into reverting back to the same problem again.
Thank you. This is a very complex issue, because when I present my case, a rightful question is that there were many reform attempts in the 19th century Ottoman Empire and Egypt, under Tanzimat and Muhammad Ali Pasha.
Correct.
Then the secularists, as you point out, Ataturk, Iran's Shah, Habib Bourguiba, Jamal Abdel Nasser, Baas regime, Sukarno in Bangladesh. But the problems were not solved, at least not fully solved. I am saying that a key problem of ulema state alliance was to marginalization of the merchant class economic entrepreneurs and the intellectuals, independent, secular or Islamic scholars. They marginalized both classes. The secularist reformers, unfortunately, were mostly military men with top-down reform understanding, and they didn't encourage economic entrepreneurs and intellectuals. They even saw them as a problem, because the military men and the authoritarian secularist leaders thought they knew what to do, and they want to impose top-down. It created an Islamist reaction, and also it failed to really revive economy and intellectual life in their countries. And then, as you rightly suggested, in order to legitimize their secular regimes, they tried to co-opt the ulama. But in reality, whenever a secular or other leader tried to co-opt the ulama always get benefits from that. Look at Al-Azhar or Mufti office in Egypt,
yes,
or Diyanet in Turkey. The secularist Kemalist aim was to build Diyanet to control mosques. They were inspired by some French understanding of secularism controlling religion. But at the end, the Diyanet itself became a huge institution today, controlling about 100,000 mosques, every Friday sermon with a standard text. And the ulema-state alliance, therefore, never one-sided, mutually beneficial. Even if politicians try to use ulema, at the end, ulema gain authority from this relationship. Therefore, a certain level of separation is necessary. Even my secularist friends say, oh, we cannot separate, otherwise religion become more dangerous. But at the end, religion come back in a stronger way. And today, Diyanet talks about everything. Diyanet president visit military offices. Diyanet president talk about what is haram, what is halal in public life, etc.
Right. I'm taking the last line of what you said to ask two questions. The first question, as you rightly mentioned, some argue that independent religious authority will be more rigid, will not allow reform because otherwise they will lose their existence. How do you say, or how to argue back against that point? And the other point, who can protect the reformists? Because some reformists saying without a protection from the state, and we now see countries like maybe the United Arab Emirates, even Saudi Arabia, is trying to co-opt the reformists to counter the religious authority and empower their leaders. So I'm sorry, two questions, but I trust that you will handle them.
No, very important questions, and they are related to each other. First of all, in the short run, yes, if we remove entire regulation and political control from religious groups, we may see more radicalism. It's possible.
Right.
And the Christian European history, it has full of lessons. When the Lutheran Reformation began, people started to read the text directly, millions and tens of millions of Bibles printed, and all sorts of radical interpretations of Protestantism, more radical than Catholic understanding, emerge. But in the long run, with competition, with open market, with discussions, they reach a deeper understanding of theology and philosophy and went beyond the medieval understandings. In the Muslim world, yes, in the short run, democratization, separation of religion and state, openings, they are all challenging things in the short run. But if we want an enlightening future in the long run, with more productive, if you want more Nobel Prize winners in the Muslim world, if we want a more rationalist, open-minded interpretations of Islam, so we should have self-confidence and let the discussion take place in public life and minimize the control. Related to your second question, who would protect the reformers? It's like the Plato's question in Republic, if the guardians protect us, who will protect us from the guardian? So once certain politicians protect the reformers, then these politicians make them the means of their political gain. And then social trust to reformist Muslims is totally lost. That's historically, in fact, Muslims were much more vibrant than the Christians in the 8th, 9th, 10th centuries. And when the Mu'tazili, the rationalist philosophers,
yes,
had the early 9th century enlightened Abbasi Caliph, Ma'mun, then the followers of Ma'mun, they imposed mihna, like an inquisition. They want everybody to say Quran is a creation of God, like a rationalist imposition, but it backfired. It backfired badly because people in the mass in society says these rationalists are just tools of government. And today, fast forwarding 21st century, if reformist-minded Muslims are supported by government, there is a lack of trust to them. They are seeing not authentic and genuine. Therefore, independence of the government is better. Even if nobody protect us, we can reflect our ideas. There are now social media giving us opportunities. It's better to have less contact with governments. for reformist Muslims to have more social basis and convince people.
Right. Just as a last joint from the same point, people argue that if in weak states, we need authoritarian leaders because we have weak states. And look at Syria, look at Libya. When the dictator gone, the country collapsed and the Islamists become the most dominant groups. And because they have the arms and the religion, they are denying everybody else any authority and creating like stagnation and terror. How do you answer that? Sorry.
So, no, this is a very important question. Many, especially unfortunately, after the failure of democratization attempts of Arab uprisings, many of us are really disappointed and are losing optimism. I would say that the dictatorial regimes are responsible for their aftermath. So if, for example, my students asking, Professor, is Libya today better than Libya under Gaddafi? And I am answering them, turn the table and ask, isn't Gaddafi responsible what we see today? Because after 40 years of regime, that's the legacy. Can you expect overnight change? No, it changed. Again, it's short term, any democratization. Look at France. The French Revolution was horror. Many people die, guillotine, Robespierre and everything, but at the end, they built a French Republic, certain understandings with problems. In the short run, problems will occur. And if we are always afraid of the short run disruption of the end of dictatorship, that's an infinite circle. We will always live under dictatorship then. So then I have deep respect to Arab people. During the Arab uprisings, they say no, they took risks. And it was a good lesson to learn. I know how disrupting and upsetting for all of us the result. But in the long run, if we have more intellectual planning, theoretical planning, and discuss publicly, have interaction between intellectual like yourself in the West and those in the Middle East, we use social media and everything. And let me just say that Islam is, yes, it's a threat, but Islam is also somehow a result of despotism, because secularist top-down policies created certain level of disappointments, and Islamists use them very well. In Turkey, for example, many problems, and Islamists kept blaming Kemalists, kept blaming secularists, and now they are in charge for over a decade. And they made problems even deeper. And that's a bad thing, but people also realize that is how bad government Islamists produce, how the cliche that Islam is the solution is misleading. Maybe let's conclude with an optimistic note that maybe after seeing problems of assertive secularism and assertive Islamism, Muslim societies may reach to an optimum point where more religious friendly secularism and Islam become more an issue of worship, ethics, morality, rather than dictating rules in public life. And that may be a middle ground between the two extremes. Finally, we can reach hopefully in the future.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that at the end, and I really want to finish on an optimistic note. That's why I will ask you, how do you see the future of Turkey after Erdogan? I see Turkey as a country who tried everything now. And if there is an optimism in one country, I mean, obviously I'm hoping all the Muslim countries have the same, but at least now in the near future, my generation would love to see maybe things are getting better. Are you optimistic then that Turkey will reach this maturity after Erdogan?
I am optimistic. And let me explain with my new Islam books cover. I put a good painting of one Greek philosopher, one Muslim, probably an Arab, Ibn Rushd, and a Renaissance philosopher. And a really energizing Renaissance painting showing how the three civilizations connected. And I'm happy that my book has been translated to Indonesian, Persian, Malay, and Arabic. And for Arabic, they use a dark cover, dark image. I said the publisher, why did you use this? They say, because your book is a dark book. No, I said, it is not a dark book. It's very optimistic book. It shows Muslims that they had a brilliant history they can revive today. So that's how optimistic I am. And I see now, according to public polls in Turkey, Iran, some Arab countries, a secularist generation coming. Even in Turkey's public Islamic schools, many young people becoming deist. And a major reason for them, a reaction to Islamist rule, and seeing how corrupt and how unethical can be, not only the ruling party, but many tariqas, Islamic jama'as, communities. They really failed and make people disappointed, especially young generation. So for the future, if this secularist generation in Iran, Turkey, and some Arab countries, if they came with hatred and anti-religious secularist regime they built, we won't have democracy either. So that's why I'm really hoping that we should take lesson from the both mistakes, and the next generation hopefully will reach what I see a friendly, religious friendly, more tolerant understanding of secularism in the public life. And Islam also stop being used as an ideology, then really receive its honorable position as a religion to inspire people morality and ethics. That's what at least I try to promote, and I hope about the future.
Professor Kuru, it was a pleasure to have you today. I really enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in other episodes. And thank you everyone for watching and following me today in this podcast, and tune in for more podcasts from Turkey Trends Ahval. Thank you.
You can follow Ahval News Online podcast series through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spreaker. All you need to know about Turkey is here, for your ears, mind, and attention. Thank you for listening to our podcast.